Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Midwestern Martial Arts Podcast. My name's Eddie Liger from Midwestern Marks.
Matty Ice, Matt Randoni.
Yes, and we're gonna talk about a couple things today. First of all, we're gonna recap UFC 275, which saw Jiri Prochaska take the light heavyweight title from Glover Texiera, the 42-year-old legend who won the title late in life. And then we're also going to talk about the upcoming UFC Fight Night, which is actually taking place tomorrow, which features Calvin Kattar versus Josh Emmet. And I got a chance to meet Kattar in an airport on my way home from the U.S. Open in Las Vegas. So, yeah, that was fun to talk to, and now I'm rooting for him. He's basically my best friend, and I'm going to tell everyone I helped him train for this fight. The UFC just recently announced their UFC 276 fight card, which is their International Fight Week card. And as always, the card is absolutely stacked, so we'll talk about that, although we're not going to preview it yet. We'll do that as the card draws closer. And yeah, we're also going to do a segment called If We Had a Podcast blank number of years ago, where we talk about a news story from the past that we would have talked about if we had a podcast at the time. And today we are going to cover the Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor fight, primarily the lead up to that fight, and how the media tour and the McGregor sensation affected Jose Aldo's performance in that fight, basically. So yeah, how you doing, Matt?
Good. I'm ready to get started. So
Yeah. I'm pumped to talk about some MMA. I'm used to talking about politics all the time.
I'm used to listening, so now I can actually contribute, which is nice.
Right.
Once, yeah.
Yes, for sure. So who are you most impressed with at UFC 275? We had Jake Matthews as well as Jack Della Maddalena scoring big wins lower on the card. And then, of course, you had Weili Zhang putting in a really impressive performance against Joanna Champion. And, of course, Jiri Prochaska wrestling the title away from Glover Texiera with a last-second sort of bulldog choke in what is probably a fight of the year contender. Would you say so?
Yeah, I mean, that was crazy back and forth. I mean, honestly, on the feet and grappling-wise, it was an overall impressive victory for Jiri. And he showed something, I think, that some people didn't know he had, which was kind of a heart. He hadn't been, that distance yet. He's been knocking guys out, finishing guys. This is only, his third UFC fight, I believe.
Third or fourth.
Yeah, he got to the title pretty fast, and they gave him that shot, and he kind of rose to the occasion there. So really, really impressive performance overall.
Yeah, I saw a tweet that I thought summed it up really well. It said, this fight was old man strength versus never quit.
Yep.
And that was Jiri. He talks about how it's his destiny to be the UFC champion, and it's hard to stop someone like that as an athlete. It's motivation's a big thing, and Jiri sort of had all the motivation coming into this. Glover had achieved his dream. He's older, nearing the end of his career for sure, so it's unlikely that he's going to go on a long dominant title run. So he fought hard, but I think Jiri overall had more motivation in this fight, and he was more determined, and that's ultimately what it came down to. And I think he also did, like you said, show some grappling skills and showed some heart that we didn't know he had, and that he's certainly been improving on, because if you go back and watch his fights with like Mo Lawal, even the fight against Carl Albrechtsen, who I believe is a experienced wrestler, pretty good light heavyweight outside of the UFC, Jiri gets controlled on the ground quite a bit. So I was thinking Glover was going to be able to take him down, tap him out, control him on the ground, but Jiri was able to fight off and eventually submit Glover, which I never expected to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the stats too, I mean, Glover took about 17 shots, landed about 5 of them. I mean, for him, that's a very, very low percentage. He usually gets in, and and if you watch him, he kind of just dives in on a leg. He tries to just get his hands locked, and as soon as he gets his hands locked, he's automatically dumping them to the mat and taking their back and ground and pounding. But Jiri was able to use his length too against the cage and kicked off the cage a couple of times, which was crazy. The leg strength that he has to have even to do that is insane. The hips, honestly. But even the striking, I mean, Glover had more total strikes than him. Glover was landing towards the end of the fight a lot more. He started to pick up on Jiri's motions a little bit more. That flying knee that Yuri kept throwing kept getting him in trouble too. I know I was watching Adesanya's reaction to it, and he was freaking out about why he kept throwing this flying knee, because every single time Glover would either get him to the ground from it or he'd slip and fall. I mean, there's some little things Yuri has to fix in order to, I think, beat a guy like Jan. I think that's a tough matchup for him. I think they're going to stand, but Jan's a big, strong guy who can wrestle really, really well and strike really, really well. So you make those mistakes against a Muay Thai guy like that, you might run into some trouble in that next fight.
Yeah, and Jan's striking is really technical and basic, and we've seen flashier strikers in the past have trouble with him, so I'm really interested to see that as the next fight. I don't know what's next for Glover. He could fight another contender and jump right back into a title shot, or maybe he'll try and wait it out. He's not much for marketing himself or trash talking his way into fights, so I don't know if waiting is the best idea. It might just be good to try and take on maybe an Anthony Smith again, do a rematch or something like that.
Yeah.
Try and get back into a title fight. But yeah, I mean, no shame in Glover Texiera losing that fight to Yuri. He's a great fighter, and not that I know anything about fighting, or not that I'm one to, or I have any place to tell fighters what to do. But as a wrestler who enjoys watching MMA, I gotta say I've never seen a BJJ fighter or boxer pick up wrestling so well as Glover, other than maybe GSP.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way he keeps his hips in and does the things that are important in wrestling, but that are really hard and take years and years of repetitive repetition and drilling things correctly. You can tell Glover has put in that work, and that's what allowed him to have this career resurgence and win the title. So, I'd recommend any MMA fighter look at that. Look at how he uses his hips. Look at how he dumps fighters to the mat. Yeah, really, really cool how he learned the sport of wrestling to sort of have this late career resurgence.
Oh yeah, definitely. And another thing about this card too is just it was supposed to have Vittori and Whitaker on it. People forget about that. That bout was canceled and rescheduled, but people were I saw some tweets about maybe the card not being up to par, and they're like, why are we paying a pay-per-view for this kind of card? I think it ended up, overshining a lot of people's thoughts and kind of being something that, making something out of nothing almost is what people were saying. And I think, from the entire main card really showed that, even from the earlier fights, like Jake Matthews, that was a crazy good performance. I'm pretty sure he was the underdog in the fight going in. And Fiallo's tough, and he's a strong dude. He hits hard, hits really, really hard. But Matthews just used distance and continuous pressure on him the entire time and didn't let Fiallo throw off his feet at all. He was always on his back foot, ultimately letting Matthews pick him apart on the cage. But really, really impressive fight. And even looking at those stats, too, I mean, Matthews 49 total strikes to Fiallo's 19. Like, you can just tell the pressure was on him the entire time. So that was a very, very impressive performance as well.
Yeah, I've always liked Jake Matthews. I've always been impressed with him. I hope they give him a step up in competition next. I know he's sort of fallen short when he's faced that really higher level competition. I can't think off the top of my head who he's been beat by, but I'd like to see him take a step up because I think he's been developing well, and it's exciting to have someone like that in the welterweight division. But I do also want to talk about the other big fight that went down on this card, Weili Zhang versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Some people were saying that Joanna did not look as focused going into the fight, that maybe she wasn't training as hard or being as disciplined as she had been in the past on her ascent to the title. And a lot of people were saying that Weili Zhang is still developing, looking a lot better in every fight, learning from her hiccups, and some people expected Weili to pull away from Joanna and really dominate, even though their last fight was a closely contested, war fight. Did it win Fight of the Year?
I think it did, yeah.
The best women's fight that we've ever seen. And that's what ended up happening. Weili dominated, showed that her skills have just been accelerating, and then Joanna retired after the fight, which to me shows that she probably did have one foot out the door.
Yeah.
She's looking forward to her life after fighting.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, nothing but respect for Joanna. Obviously, she changed. She helped change the game in women's fighting for sure. She was a dominant champion for so long, and she was crazy good compared to those fighters back in that time. But it just keeps evolving, and that's what this fight showed, and that's what the Rose fight showed as well. It's just somebody that had that same level of striking, if not better than hers, but also had that kind of willingness to stand in there and bang with her. Because she bullied everyone that she fought previously, and then she ran into Rose, who kind of didn't, take a step back and kept her on the back foot the entire time and kept putting pressure on her, and then ultimately finished her. And that's what Weili does too. She's crazy. She's a Muay Thai fighter as well. I know she trains down at Tiger a lot too, and she just kept the pressure on Joanna and opened up with that spinning back fist out of nowhere. Honestly, and it caught me by surprise. I thought Joanna was still awake when she got hit. It looked like she was going for a shot, and all of a sudden she hits her face. But Weili is just that's a different level. That's someone I think that between her and Rose are going to be back and forth with champions. No disrespect to Esparza, but I think that Weili steps in and takes that title next fight, and then I think Rose is right back up after that. I think that's just a constant rotation that they're at right now with that division. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm excited to see the adjustments that Weili makes against Rose if and when they fight again. But yeah, I think the next fight to make is definitely Esparza versus Weili, which Esparza, obviously, her last fight was so boring it kind of overshadowed the fact that she won the title, but kind of a similar story to Glover. Not as old as Glover, but, a wrestler who through perseverance was able to take the title, even though originally she had the titles taken from her by Joanna, who absolutely starched her, knocked her out and made her look almost amateurish.
She beat Rose to win it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and then beat Rose.
Fighter.
So, true. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing Weili versus Esparza. I think Esparza can present some problems, but I agree that Weili runs through her, and I'm always gonna root for Weili in pretty much every fight. I'll take her over Rose because she is from communist China, the People's Republic of China, and the last time in the build up to that fight, Rose was using sort of anti-communist rhetoric to build the fight or to call out Weili Zhang, saying better dead than red. Yeah, better dead than red. That's what she said. And Weili said, "Come to China and check it out. It's a pretty cool place. You wouldn't say that if you were here." So I side with Weili in that political battle there.
Absolutely. Next, I guess this is probably the most controversial fight on the card.
I forgot this fight happened.
And personally, I thought watching it live that Shevchenko lost. You have Valentina Shevchenko and Santos. They had a 5-round, kind of almost a war there. It was a really, really good fight, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Santos takes her back, I think 2 rounds, maybe 3.
2 rounds. Yeah.
Gets body triangle and controls her on the ground for the rest of the round. To me, that's, she wasn't really being that active. She was trying for a choke, but not really throwing punches. And I think Valentina was throwing punches from bottom every time that she was taken down, which kind of swayed the judges, I think, in a certain way. But if you look at that, the ground control aspect of it, she basically controlled her on the ground for 6 minutes with those 2, when she took her back twice between the 2 rounds. I mean, that's a lot of the fight there that she was on her back and actively working for a choke, And Santos took her down one time in the fight. I don't know if they were in half guard or maybe in side control. But the ref, I don't remember who was reffing, they stopped it and stood him back up.
Mm.
And to me, it was a powerful held position by Santos. That was questionable to stand up. Maybe I'm wrong. You have to watch it back, but that's just what I remember from watching it live.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see the punch statistics on that one because Valentina had a large accumulation of punches that she was throwing from the bottom. Yeah, so you have Valentina landing 234 total strikes with Talia Santos landing 128. 77 significant strikes for Valentina versus 55 for Santos. I don't know if any of the strikes that Valentina threw when Santos was on her back were considered significant. They might have been. But she was able to accumulate a lot of damage that way, even in the rounds where she had her back taken. And yeah, I don't know. Santos definitely should have been more active. She should have picked up the pace and tried to do some damage from those positions. A lot of times I think fighters waste too much time searching for submissions where they should just take the Chael Sonnen approach of just,
Right.
pound away and try and do some damage to, and maybe a submission will open. But yeah, I saw some people like The Weasel is a really good MMA podcast and YouTube channel, and they break down these close fights. Whenever there's a close decision, they'll tally up grappling effectiveness, and then they'll tally up the low, medium, and high damaging shots. And whoever generally tallies up the most is usually the one who wins the round. And I think this fight almost shows a flaw in that method, where you just try and look at a fight totally analytically and try and, measure who won quantitatively using numbers and just measuring the numbers. Because, like you said, subjectively, Talia Santos was in control for a lot of that fight. And I think it shows more control and dominance in the fight to take someone's back and hold them in a body triangle than it does to get body triangled and just hit someone behind you 200 times. So, yeah, I agree with you. I thought Talia Santos probably should have won 3 out of the 2 rounds. Even though the Weasel, when he dissected it, he said that Shevchenko should have indeed won because the round that was close, he gave to Shevchenko because she had an accumulation of punches.
Yeah, and it could have been that way for sure. I thought, at least watching it live, I have to watch it back again. I haven't really rewatched it and really dove into it again, but yeah, I thought that she shocked people too. I mean, she came off the Contender series, so she hasn't been somebody that was necessarily seen to be as an up and comer that was a big name. I know when we watched the preview, we were like, who is this that she's fighting? And honestly, I thought it was going to be a finish. But it's the same thing as, Valentina's been that long dominant champion for a very, very long time now. And it's a matter of time where it's, one of those Joanna things where people are rising up the ranks and starting to figure out her game a little bit more. And she's getting off to slower and slower starts in every fight is what I'm noticing. She's somebody that builds with a lot of momentum and builds with time. She continuously just gets better. But sometimes those slow starts are gonna bite you, and did in that fight. She got her back taken, and thinking in the second or maybe the first even too. So, yeah.
And what's interesting is there are more highly touted prospects than Talia Santos in that division. There are prospects coming up who have great kickboxing and striking potential. I think MMA On Point, in their video of the top prospects going into 2022, like 3 or 4 of them were women's strawweights. So, yeah, I think it's only a matter of time before the division catches up to Shevchenko, which she's been a dominant champion, amazing champion, but, this division needs some life. It needs some life, and it's a common weight. There's a lot of good women out there around this weight, so as they make their way to the UFC and a lot of these fighters develop, Manon Fiorot is one that comes to mind, the main one that comes to mind, French kickboxer. Really excited to see her make her way up the ranks and eventually fight Shevchenko. Potentially, I'd love to see that as the next fight. I don't know if Fiorot has a fight booked, but that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, that wouldn't be a bad... And it would be good to mix up the division a little bit and give, something new and something, like you said, up and coming for that division.
She's fighting Andrade, okay.
Yeah, so that would be a good test for her, though. And then that would be, Andrade just had that sweet standing, standing arm triangle almost, basically. Like, that was nuts. And she's tough, obviously. She's a really, really good wrestler and good grappler. She hits hard, too, so that'll be an interesting fight. But, yeah, I think that sets up a number 1 contenders fight, and the next person will fight Shevchenko out of that. She's really ran through the division now. I think maybe she's wanting a super fight with Pena if Pena beats Nunez.
Could be.
Again. That could be interesting as well. I think Pena is really, really, really tough, and it'll be hard for Valentina to beat her. But Pena also walks kind of right into people, so Valentina could pick her apart pretty easily at the same time. So that's an interesting fight as well. They need to do something like that, though, to kind of revamp both of those divisions. Unless Pena beats Nunez again, then it gets, pretty interesting.
True. Yeah, and Jessica Andrade has been one of my favorite female fighters to watch. Like you said, she's had so many incredible finishes in the UFC. But I'm really rooting for Manon Fiorot in that fight because I want to see new blood in the women's strawweight division. Both those, like you said, that division could use a revamping. But let's move on to the upcoming UFC fight night that's going down tomorrow. Calvin Kattar, my training partner, my best friend, everyone. If you see Calvin Kattar, don't ask him about me. But he's my best friend, trust me. He's fighting Josh Emmett. Said I got to root against Josh Emmett. He's a great knockout artist. Been having an incredible career in the UFC. Only really lost to Jeremy Stevens, and then I can't remember who else he's lost to. Someone really tough.
Yeah. I think I just watched this not too long ago.
he's probably Stevens' best win, to be honest with you. Got wins over Shane Burgos and Dan Ige. Oh, that was when he lost.
That was Stevens.
Oh,
yeah.
okay. Maybe it was a while back, but either way,
it was before 2016. So.
Yeah, true. So it must have been a while ago.
Yeah.
So he's been on a tear. Really, only lost that match or that fight to Stevens where he got caught. He's also got some really colorful tattoos, which I'm a big fan of. But
he's a creepy looking dude, kind of.
he is a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's good. He's really tough, and this is a good test for him. I mean, that's another division right there that could use another face in it. Basically, you're kind of having this rotation of Volk and Holloway at the top, and then Ortega, Korean Zombie, and all those guys kind of trying to climb that ladder. Yair Rodriguez, so those guys are starting to all fight each other, and now we're kind of running out of some space here with those fights. Josh Emmett could shake that up a little bit, and he's got the power to do it. I think he can strike with Calvin Kattar, and I think that's going to be really, really interesting to see how he attacks that game plan against him, because Calvin Kattar's despite what you saw in the Holloway fight, still one of the best boxers in that division, if not in the UFC. So that's going to be a really, really interesting fight.
Yeah, and Emmet is extremely powerful. He has the most knockouts, or the highest knockout rate per round in the featherweight division, other than Conor McGregor, which is hard to beat. And obviously, McGregor's faced tougher opponents probably, but he didn't fight that many times in the featherweight division.
Right.
He had a lot of quick knockouts. Emmett's been fighting for a long time, and he knocks people down, he knocks people out. But like you said, Kattar is such a good boxer. And in his last fight, who did he fight in his last fight?
Kattar?
Yeah.
Crap.
I just remember I was worried for him. I was like, this is a tough fight for Calvin Kattar coming off that brutal loss to Max Holloway.
Oh,
Giga Chikadze.
Yeah.
It was almost like they were trying to use Kattar as a stepping stone, for Giga to get to a title shot. And Kattar just whooped that ass.
He did. He really did. He killed him.
He did.
And that's crazy because, and that's what, where there's like truly levels to the game of mixed martial arts. You have a guy like Calvin Kattar who destroys people until they hit someone like Max Holloway. And then Max Holloway destroys him. And then you have someone like Volk who's beaten Max Holloway twice. Like, it's just crazy that the levels of these fighters as you get to the top of the division. And it's crazy that, there's still such a big separation between the guys that are 1 and 2 and the guys that are 3 and 4. You drop outside that top 5, then it's, even worse. There's a huge gap. You have those guys, kind of those diamonds in the rough like Khamzat, who's ranked 12th or 13th when he fought Gilbert Burns and won. That's just a different beast, though. You get that every once in a while, maybe. So, I mean, Josh Emmett's kind of one of those guys that climb the ranks, but this is going to be a really, really good test for him.
Yeah, and it's also crazy. The levels of the game are crazy, and it's crazy how fast people can change levels and how high certain fighters can jump or how high they can raise their level. Like, it may be difficult to understand for like a fan who hasn't done combat sports, but like Calvin Kattar could very well beat Max Holloway one day. That fight could have been the catalyst for him to, change a lot of things technically, maybe change his approach to fighting in certain ways, and we saw him look so good in his last fight. I think Calvin Kattar's a fighter with great potential who we could really see shoot up a few levels here. So I'm picking him in this fight with Emmet. He's a minus 230 favorite versus Emmet, who's at plus 190. I'll go with Kattar, and I'll go with him to get a second round knockout.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm probably also gonna go Kattar on this one. I think it goes to the distance though. I think it goes decision. I think Kattar wins. I don't think Emmet goes out like you said, but it's definitely possible. Kattar hits hard. And I don't know if Emmett's, like you said, faced somebody that is as technical of a striker and kind of almost a brawler as Kattar. So, Jeremy Stephens, he hits hard definitely, but it's kind of wild and it's easy to get around. Kattar is a very, very sharp and accurate striker as well, as hitting really hard. So that's going to be very interesting. I'm gonna go Kattar by decision. So moving on to the next one then. We have this fight that was rescheduled from a couple pay-per-views ago, I believe. I think it was supposed to be on the 273 card maybe with Khamzat and Burns. You have Donald Cerrone and Joe Lozon. This is a fight that a lot of people are critiquing currently.
Are they? I haven't seen it.
I think that they're happy to have the entertainer of Cowboy Cerrone fighting again.
Mm-hmm.
I think people are really intrigued by that. He's kind of that veteran in the game that's always going to keep fighting, and he kind of just makes fight week fun and makes the fight fun and makes the whole experience for fans fun. But you have Joe Lozon and Donald Cerrone that are fighting for what, basically. For them it's maybe money, or maybe it's pride, or I know Cerrone wants to get to 50 UFC fights, so he's like 2 away from that or something like that. But to me this just doesn't make sense. I mean, Dana already said that the loser is out. Basically they have to hit the road. But what does it give the winner? A sense of hope that he's going to climb the ranks again? I mean, maybe it's who are we to say that they can't? But that's a big feat to climb there, especially with how Joe Lozon fought Jens Pulver. Like, he's been in the game for a long time, like a very, very long time. So I don't know. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I probably have a little difference of opinion here, actually. I'm a big Cowboy fan. I wore the American flag cowboy hat to celebrate Cowboy Fight Week. But a while back, Vitor Belfort, when people were criticizing him for using TRT, he said, I wouldn't use TRT if they had a Legends division, where they had the old fighters fight each other. Because so often you see fights like BJ Penn versus Yair Rodriguez, or Uriah Faber versus Peter Yan, where these old fighters with big name value are just fed to these young sharks, and it leads to these brutal fights, these horrible knockouts, and we don't know what kind of brain damage that's doing to these fighters, which, you could say the same about Cerrone and Lozon, right? They're both old, so they can both do brain damage to each other, but also they're both old, they're both slow, they're both legends, they're from the same era. It's less likely that one of them is going to suffer some kind of brutal knockout than if they were being sent to fight, I don't know, Rafael Fiziev, right? I don't want to see Joe Lozon or Donald Cerrone get brutally head kicked by Rafael Fiziev. But I'm down to see them fight, and actually I think Dana's idea of one of them, the loser retires, is actually kind of a good idea. But what I am worried about, and where I 100% agree with you, is where does the winner go from this? Because we know how these fighters are, they have to be delusional in order to be this good. They have to fully believe in themselves to an almost delusional level. And we know that the UFC loves to take old fighters and feed them to the young. So I worry that Donald Cerrone gets a knockout here, and then, they make Donald Cerrone versus Rafael Fiziev.
Right. Yeah, and that's where I'm at with it too. I'm all for the Legends fights. I'm cool with the Legends division. I think that's a good idea. I think that's something that could open up a lot of possibilities for the UFC, and you can bring back guys like Anderson Silva. Obviously his relationship with the UFC might not be the best right now with Dana, but you open up that possibility of bringing him back, who's still in, by the way, freaking prime form. He's knocking out professional boxers. Yeah, this guy's insane. So you have guys like him, and then you already know that guys like Tito and Chuck are going to try to fight again. That's where you run into some problems. Like, those guys shouldn't be in a cage together. We've seen them fight way past kind of their prime and way past their careers, and it was sloppy, And so I don't know if the UFC wants to brand themselves with something like that may bring them down. Something that's so risky like that, like a veterans division, where you have a higher risk of injuries, pulling out of fights. Guys are older, guys get hurt a lot easier in training. Guys pull out of fights that way. You have the opportunity of fights just complete busts. And have two basically old guys that are just swinging for the fences and no one's hitting each other. Like, there's a bunch of possibilities there. I think this one's not even close to that, obviously. I think these guys are both really good fighters still, even though they are past their prime. But I am very interested to see what happens here with the grappling of Lozon and the striking of Cerrone, and kind of getting, Lozon's going to hit some kind of slick shit to put him in some weird holds. So it's going to be weird how Cerrone goes from fighting mostly strikers to this guy.
Yeah. And I don't think they should actually do a Legends division. I just like the principle of them, not throwing older fighters to the wolves. But yeah, I don't know. I think Lozon will probably strike with him a little bit. He should definitely try and get it to the ground. But even if they get it to the ground, it's going to be so fun. They're going to be going for submissions. So maybe, either way, it's going to be fun. But I'll go with Cerrone by... I'll go third round knockout.
Yeah, I'll go. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go Lozon. I'm gonna go second round submission. Actually,
Ooh, that's a good pick.
I'm just gonna. I'm a big Cerrone fan. I make it seem like I'm not. By the way, I'm talking about this.
I'm gonna get a Budweiser.
But yeah, I just think that this is one of those fights where he looked horrible on the scale. Did you see his
No, I
weigh-in
didn't
video?
see. He looked
My
rough.
God, you could tell that he had to pull out of a fight
Oh.
basically, and had to gain a bunch of weight to get healthy again.
And he's back at lightweight too.
Yeah, so he had to drop all that weight down. He looked skinny. And that has to be hard. I know it's hard. I've done something like that for wrestling. I'm sure you have too. Where you're sick, and you're cutting
Yep.
weight, so you have to give yourself fluid, but you can't take in a certain amount of fluid or foods that you want to make you feel better. That's kind of where I bet he was at, and then also recovering from that, probably not doing much training while he's sick, and having food poisoning and all that stuff, and then having to kind of rebuild that appetite again and cut all it back down again. So it's a thing that messes with the body a lot. I think that people aren't taking into play with this fight, and then with age that gets harder, and I think that's something that could affect him in this fight as well. Maybe conditioning wise, and that grappling stuff that Lozon does where he rolls around with you on the ground, that's exhausting, man. That's just as exhausting as standing and banging with someone, if not more exhausting, trying to grab onto somebody who's really freaking sweaty and you're rolling around. It's exhausting. So I'm excited to see how Cerrone does in that situation too.
Don't be surprised if Cerrone catches a submission, because he's got very underrated offensive submission game too. So I could see that happening as well. The odds on that, Cerrone opened as a -170 favorite. Lozon was a +145 underdog. Right now, they have Cerrone as -165. And Lozon is +145. So maybe after Cerrone looked like a skeleton on the weigh-ins, his odds went down just a tiny little bit. But yeah, the last fight on this card, unless you have anything else you want to say about Cerrone versus Lozon.
No, I was just gonna see if I could find this picture of him on the scale.
Oh, I can edit it in.
Yeah, definitely. It was pretty bad.
Oof.
I don't know if that was it or not, but it was pretty bad. Let's move on to the next one. We got Tim Means. And Kevin Holland. I think that they are starting to regret they being the UFC, how hard they pushed Kevin Holland in the beginning. They put this man, Kevin Holland, through the gauntlet of people within his first couple of fights in the UFC.
He's fought so many good guys.
Making his name, and he, knocks out Jacare with a freaking back fist from bottom. and they take that and run with it, and they're going to give him guys like Vettori and
Derek
Brunson, when the guy obviously knows he struggles with wrestling, basically set him up for failure. The UFC maybe thought it was going to be an Israel Adesanya thing where he was long enough to pick apart Brunson from the outside, and finish him. But Izzy's a really, really, really good striker. Not that Kevin Holland's not, just not to the level of Izzy. So I think they're starting to give him fights that make sense for his caliber right now. And starting to rebuild him up with fights like Tim Means here. It's still an interesting fight. Tim Means has a lot of fights under his belt. As you say, he's 32-12. He's got a lot of fights. But so does Kevin Holland, and I think he's young and fresh and kind of got the momentum right now. So I'm gonna go Kevin Holland. I think we'll go third round TKO.
Can Kelvin Holland shut the hell up and wrestle?
No
That is, I think, what decides every single one of his fights. Can he focus? Because I know that's how he stops himself from being nervous in the moment. But also you have to embrace a little bit the energy of that moment, and even the nervous energy when you're competing. And focus your mind on what you have to do. And he's been doing that a lot more in his last fights. He's taking MMA way more seriously now. You see that in his interviews. He's going and wrestling with Johnny Hendricks all the time. So he's taking it more seriously. To how effective that will be, I think is yet to be seen. You want to pull up his SureDog page? I want to look at his last fights. But yeah, the UFC really took a chance. They basically said either Kevin Holland's going to get exposed by these good wrestlers like Vettori and Brunson, or he'll pull something off and knock them out, because he also knocked out the grappler Jacare. And what happened was he got exposed. So I do think they rushed him a little bit. I don't know if he needed to fight Vettori and Derek Brunson, but fighting one of them, has clearly humbled him, if you listen to his interviews, and forced him to focus on his weaknesses. So I think now they might be able to build him up. I think this might work out well for the UFC. Oh, sorry, I missed that.
No,
Can you
you're
scroll
good.
up? He had the no contest with Dawkins, and then he beat Alex Oliveira, who's a striker,
Yep.
so that was definitely a gimme fight. This fight with Tim Means will be more of a test. Tim Means is extremely sneaky. Tim Means is a fighter's fighter. Been around forever. Once slipped in a sauna while cutting weight and knocked himself out and had to pull out of a fight. So I'm excited to see how Kevin Holland does. Is a perfect test for him at this point in his career. Not a beast of a wrestler like Brunson or Marvin Vettori, who's also extremely physically strong. But now Holland's down at welterweight, which also may show that he's more disciplined and focused. And he's fighting Means, who has grappling skills, but is not this powerful, controlling wrestler. In Team Means' last fights, he's on a 3-fight win streak right now. Beating Nicholas Dalby, Mike Perry, and Laureano Staropoli after a loss to Daniel Rodriguez. It's pretty freaking tough. So yeah, that's what I think. I'll go with Kevin Holland though as well. I think he puts it together in this one and wins by decision, or maybe knockout.
Yeah, and he's a big favorite. Kind of a big favorite. He's a -280. Tim Means +230. Yeah, I forgot about the welterweight drop. That's going to be interesting for sure. But always excited to listen to him talk during the fights, and
it is hilarious.
Some of my favorite moments is with Khabib when he's like yelling over the cage at Khabib to help him with the wrestling and stuff. But I mean, it is what it is. It's entertaining. But at the end of the day, like you said, if you want to be kind of the top level in that division, you cannot be doing those things unless you guys are like Israel Adesanya, who can do it and still knock people out. So.
And he does it tactically.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Which is interesting to me, which we're gonna touch on, I guess, the card coming up later on probably. But that mental side of the game with Israel Adesanya is something that I feel like we haven't seen since McGregor almost. He kind of just has done it to every opponent that he's faced, but that's something that we'll dive deeper into later.
Yeah, he sort of has an otherworldly confidence to him, which is helpful, I think, for sure. Are there any other fights we have? There's Julian Marquez, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Looking forward to seeing him fight. Oh, one more fight we need to talk about. Guram Kutateladze versus Damir Ismagulov. I have not been able to look up this Damir Ismagulov guy or watch him fight, but he's 23-1. And Guram is 12-2. Guram, in his UFC debut, I believe, or maybe his second fight, fought Mateusz Gamrot, who is the KSW champion. Like, possibly the best prospect out of Europe in the past, 10 years. Just someone, with incredible wrestling, striking, and next-level MMA prospect who's now on like a 4 or 5 fight win streak after losing to Guram Kutateladze, who trains with Hamzat Shamayev from Georgia. Guram is from Georgia, and we haven't got to see him since that fight, really. So I'm so pumped to see him fight again. And I don't know, like, the fight with Mateusz Gamrot was such an insane fight to take for him. Like, Mateusz Gamrot is so freaking tough, and Guram basically didn't. Only the hardcore fans watched that fight, and the hardcore fans loved that fight. But Guram got no real name value off that, and now Mateusz Gamrot is being pushed hard by the UFC, and he could be in title contention soon, which makes Guram look better. But now he's fighting this guy, Damir Ismagulov,
31.
Seems like an absolute stud, 31 years old, 23-1 Russian, who has won his last 4 fights in the UFC. So Guram, gotta love him, fighter's fighter. Absolute beast, but I do not know what he's doing with his management, or what his management is doing, why he's taking these fights. It literally seems like he's just waiting and training and taking the hardest fights that he possibly could in the division. But I'll go with Guram Kutateladze to take a decision, but who the heck knows, because I've never even watched this Russian he's fighting.
Yeah, I have to go with Guram too by decision. I don't know enough about Damir to say that Guram will get a finish, but if he's 23-1, then he's got to be tough. So he can't be finished very easily.
And fighting in Russia,
right?
Like even the regional scenes in Russia are gonna be tough.
Right. So yeah, I'll go Gurung by decision, but that'll be a fun fight. That's on the early card too. So there's actually a decent amount of early fights and on that main card too, a decent amount of fights that are interesting for it being a free card.
Absolutely.
That's what the UFC I think has to do. I think they have to start pushing those free cards a little bit more too to gain more of an audience. If you're gonna convince people to pay almost $80 now, I guess it is for a pay-per-view. Those free cards have to be something that catches people's attention, so they want to buy those pay-per-views. Because, you look at a card like 276, and it's a card that's stacked, and people want to buy that just because of what it is. But, those cards that had this previous pay-per-view with Jiri and nobody really knowing about Santos, no one really knows about Jake Matthews, that kind of thing. I mean, it's hard to sell that pay-per-view for $80 a person.
Yeah.
So I think them pushing these free cards and kind of doing a Kattar and Emmet thing, which could set up a number one titles fight, a number one contender fight, and then having Kevin Holland, who's kind of on the rise, having Cerrone Lozon, and there's a bunch coming up. I mean, that we'll talk about. As the episodes go on, you have Dos Anjos and Fasiv coming up. That's a free card. Ortega Yair's a free card. Blades Aspinall's a free card. So they're starting to push those better main events with those free cards, which I think is just going to benefit them greatly.
That's good because they've faced some rightful criticism from people because they've been dropping the ball with some of those fight cards, just like, just putting regional talent on it and trying to make a quick buck, by taking some really crappy card somewhere. And that's going to, people don't like that. That's going to push people away from your product. That's not a high-quality product. And there's more that could be done with these fight night cards. We don't want to see a bunch of crappy fight nights and then every once in a while just a stacked card. However, speaking of stacked cards, even though we're criticizing, the fight nights being a little weak as of late, UFC 276, the UFC's International Fight Week card, which they always stack, is insane. One of the best fight cards in the modern era of the UFC.
It has to be one of the best. I mean, from top to bottom. And even, like, we were looking before we started filming this even, and the prelims, and the early prelims even have big names on there. Early prelims have Brad Tavares, you have Jim Miller, Bobby Green, you have Uriah Hall, all on that.
Andre Muniz, the guy who snapped Jacare Silva's arm, one of the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu artists in the UFC.
That's the last fight on the early prelim card, and then you go into the prelims, Jessica Eye, Macy Barber, Robbie Lawler, Brian Barberina, Brad Riddell, Jalen Turner.
I'm so pumped for Brad Riddell, Jalen Turner.
What I think they did though, they put a bunch of that team on this card, kind of like they did with Gaethje, Rose,
Adesanya's team.
Yeah, Adesanya, Volk, Brad Riddell. So I think because he trains over with them too, doesn't he?
Yes, he's at the same gym.
So I think they kind of stacked that card with those guys as well, just like they did with Usman, Gaethje, Rose. Yeah, even though Brad Riddell's not on the main card, I think they still did that. I mean, there's no room for him on this main card. This main card's insane.
Right, no kidding. Is it in Australia? So that's where they train, or New Zealand, I believe. It's in Nevada. Oh no, Las Vegas.
Is it in Vegas? Yeah, it's in Vegas.
No, I mean International Fight Week. That makes sense. They do that in Vegas every year. So.
But yeah, so I mean, God, we could start anywhere. I mean, we could start. I mean, these, like you said, Uriah Hall, Andre Muniz. That's a good fight.
I think Andre Muniz is gonna take him down and snap
Uriah
his arm.
Hall's 18-10. I didn't realize that was his record.
I mean, he's been fighting good guys, but ever since he's been in the UFC, he's honestly probably in the best streak of his career right now, other than when he knocked out Mousasi. But Muniz is gonna break his arm. Uriah Hall needs to be ready to tap out before he loses a limb.
But I mean, going on to another women's flyweight fight. Jessica Eye, Macy Barber, that's on the prelims. That's a good fight. I think Macy Barber probably beats her. Jessica Eye, 15-10. Macy Barber, 10-2. Macy Barber's kind of one of those people they're trying to push as well. She's tough, but she's young, and she's still young to the fight game, I think, and that kind of still shows in her fights.
Absolutely.
So I don't want them to push her too hard. If it is going to be something good. And I think Jessica Eye's kind of in that, she had her time at the top a little bit, or close to the top, and now she's trying to kind of fallen down the ranks a little bit more. So I think Macy Barber's that that fight where they use her Jessica as a step up to get her closer to the title in that division, especially because we were just talking about how they need to spice that division up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think she's another one of those girls that's gonna make a kind of a push towards that, anywhere from 5 to 10 range in those rankings, and then maybe try to break that top 5 after that. But there's still a lot of good competition. Even Lauren Murphy, I know she got killed by Shevchenko, but she's still tough, and she's, I think, 4th or something like that. So this is an interesting fight. I think Barber takes it. I'll go. She finishes there in the second.
Yeah, I don't see Barber being the maybe future title holder that she's sort of been touted as, but she is, has a diverse attack, which is not always something you see in, around, like you were saying, the number 10 or the lower top 10 of the women's division. So I think she'll probably be able to grapple with Ai. Ai is a bit of a one-dimensional striker who, like you said, is sort of on the decline of her career. So I think actually this is a good fight, though, because it's not like Jessica Ai is getting brutally... Well, she did get brutally knocked out once, but it's not like she's getting knocked out every fight. She's still competitive, so that'll be good. Robbie Lawler versus Brian Barberena is going to be a great fight. Brad Riddell versus Jalen Turner, that's one to watch. That's just going to be an action fight. Brad Riddell freaking brings it. Great boxer. Really underrated fighter in the toughest division in the UFC. And Jalen Turner brings it as well. Throws heat, so that'll be awesome.
Yeah, I think those guys on the same team, they ride from that same wave of confidence, too. I think Brad Riddell training with Izzy is going to make him jump leaps just being in the same gym as somebody that's a champion and a great champion like Izzy is. Those teams, it seems like the ones that are closest are the ones that are most successful. You look at the groupings of Gaethje, Usman, and Rose, all kind of taking the ranks of their division together. You got, Volk trains over there with Izzy. You got Volk, Izzy, Brad Riddell's coming up. Kai Kara France is in that team, and he's getting a title shot now. And then you have guys like, Islam, Khabib, kind of all their group together too. And they start to rise up the ranks together. I think all those guys that are kind of stragglers on the outside by themselves are the ones that are kind of feeding to climb that ladder in the division. And you see these groups that are teammates that are starting to climb those ranks, which is interesting in an individual sport like UFC, but
Right.
you still see that team aspect to it. And people are starting to go together a lot more. You see the random pairings of Khamzat and Till.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're best friends, training partners, which makes it interesting to see how Till's going to fight when he fights Hermanson in July. So yeah.
And there's so much momentum that happens with it. Like, you had the Whitman team, when Dwayne Ludwig joined Team Alpha Male, you had all those guys and feeding off each other's momentum. And it goes back to something I always have said about wrestling, is it is an individual sport because you're out there alone, but you're not really out there alone. You're a product of your teammates in so many ways, and it's so important to have not just a team where you're going to get pushed and where you're going to get pushed technically and get better technically, but also a team where you have camaraderie, where it's like, you're training every day, at this level, and if you don't want to go into the gym because you hate your teammates, it's going to be, it's going to hinder your performance in training.
Right.
And, you see these cohesive teams. AKA is another great example. DC, Cain Velasquez, Khabib, Rockhold. These teams get hot, and right now that seems to be the, whatever it's called, that kickbox, it's some city kickboxing, in Australia, So we don't want to dive too far into the specific fights on this card yet, because the card could change. Obviously it's a ways away, but just running through the main card, it looks insane. What are you most excited for on this main card?
First of all, for the fight night, shout out wrestler Darian Wynn. He's fighting Phil Hawes, who's actually a Warburg guy, I think.
No way.
Yeah, he graduated from Warburg.
Warburg versus Duran Wynn. Duran Wynn's a great freestyle wrestler.
Him and Dan were both the guys. Yeah, Warburg.
Dan
Athletics.
Ige and Phil Hawes, 2 Warburg wrestlers in the UFC.
Yeah. So, I just forgot about that. I saw it earlier, but I meant to say something. But always got to shout out the wrestlers on the podcast.
Yeah, especially
so
the D3 wrestlers. Dang.
But yeah, so let's go back to UFC 276. First fight on the main card here. You have Sean O'Malley and Pedro Munoz. This is what everyone wanted for O'Malley. This is what they wanted. Actually, people didn't realize it back when he fought Chito Vera, because Chito Vera is now starting to climb the ranks.
Yeah.
But that was an initial test, kind of where they pushed him a little bit too hard, I think.
Probably.
And it happened. Luckily for him to not ruin his career because of his personality and his charisma and the personality behind his fighting. They didn't let him sink from that at all. The fans didn't, and the UFC was able to back that still. Even after he was riding out the it's not a loss thing. I'm still undefeated, which no hate. Shout out Sean O'Malley. He's up there. You guys kind of cut off, but I'm a big Sean O'Malley fan, and I like to listen to his podcast and stuff like that too. But I think this is a good fight, and this is going to be a really good test for him to climb those ranks. I mean, that bantamweight division is another one of those divisions where you get into that top 5, it's a brawl. I mean, you have Sterling, you have Jan, you have Dillashaw back now, you have Sandhagen, you have O'Malley, you have Munoz, you have all these guys that are at the top of that division. Cheeto, Cruz is still fighting, and he's still winning. So you have all those guys at that. In that kind of mosh pit of that division, which is turning out to be one of the better divisions in the UFC right now.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's the best.
Yeah, and I think it's hard
to
beat that division. Lightweight's close, obviously.
That's
that
true.
Division's pretty stacked.
I said lightweight's the best division earlier in the podcast.
Did you?
Yes,
yeah.
They're tied.
I mean, yeah, they both are stacked, but this is kind of his fight to catapult him into that kind of mosh pit area. This doesn't do anything crazy for his career. It puts him in that mosh pit, like I said. It doesn't jump into anything maybe besides a top 5 guy after this.
Right.
Maybe. I'm not sure who he gets in that top 5 in those rankings. I'd have to pull up those rankings even.
I wouldn't be surprised if they gave him a more favorable matchup if he won this, because Pedro Munoz is a stylistic nightmare for O'Malley. He's got a brick of a head. He's never been knocked out, even though he's fought Jose Aldo and the best guys. And O'Malley has a tendency to get weird injuries in fights, basically while he's doing his incredible offense that we all love him for. That some of us love him for. So yeah.
I mean, that division's pretty freaking
It's so
stacked.
good.
Wow.
Merab Dvalishvili is a terrible fight for Sean O'Malley as well.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go, I know he was talking about he wants to beat Munoz, and then go fight Rob Font, is what I heard after that.
I think that's an easier fight than Munoz.
Yeah, I think it could be too.
I think he should fight
and then
Rob
after
Font.
that, he said he wants to jump up and fight for the title.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's actually.
So he wants to skip the mosh pit that you're talking about.
Basically, he wants to skip the Aldo Sandhagen Cheeto again. He actually did say he would fight Cheeto again for the title, I believe.
Cruz,
Dillashaw, Jan.
I'd love to see him fight Cruz too. That could be one
crazy.
that would be one that would catapult them to a fight
Yeah.
too, and it would be an easier stylistic matchup because Cruz is really obviously elusive, and it's just a matter of if O'Malley, who's extremely accurate, can get his attacks on him.
And Cruz just scheduled that fight with Cheeto, which could set up something interesting too. If Cruz does pull that off against Cheeto, you set up a O'Malley Cruz fight to maybe catapult to #1 contenders.
True.
or maybe somewhere up there.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to give a guy like Sean O'Malley a title shot over Corey Sandhagen.
Yeah.
Jose Aldo, those kind of guys that Jose Aldo's been winning constantly. And Corey Sandhagen arguably had a win over TJ Dillashaw, some people said. Fought Petr Yan fantastically, honestly. Better than I thought. And he got choked out by Aljamain, but that was, I don't know, maybe never happens again almost. I don't know. Aljamain's a really good grappler.
He's good at taking people's
Yeah,
backs, but that was just sometimes you find yourself in a bad situation early in a fight and stuff like that happens. I don't think it happens again.
But I mean, good fight. Let's see the odds right now. We got O'Malley's the -240 favorite over Munoz.
Oh, wow.
Plus
I
195.
don't agree with
underdog.
that.
I think it's the hype train behind it.
Mhm.
Maybe, I don't know.
That always affects the Vegas odds.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna go O'Malley still. I think he's kind of refocused a little bit more than he was in the past. I'm a big fan of him, and I like watching him, and kind of like watching how he is just trying to make fighting fun too. And outside of the UFC, he does a lot of smart things with his podcast and with his videos on TikTok and stuff are hilarious, and so he's kind of making it fun for everybody. The colorful hair, that kind of stuff, his whole persona. So I'm gonna go O'Malley. I'm gonna go that he TKOs him in the third.
Okay.
I think he drops Munoz. I think he's the first one to do it. I don't know, just one of those straights, man. They're long and they hit hard. So.
Yeah, I could see that happening. I heard the Weasel, that YouTuber or YouTube and podcast I like, saying that Munoz, it's gonna take a lot to put him down. It's gonna take an accumulation of strikes. He's never been knocked down, and in the past, yes, but you never know when someone's chin is gonna crack. I could see a 20-second O'Malley knockout, some highlight reel crazy that catapults him. So part of me wants to predict that, and part of me wants to take Pedro Munoz by decision. Part of me thinks O'Malley might leg kick him or punch him in the head and break his own hand and, have a tough time. But I'll go with O'Malley by knockout in round one. I'll take that. Like you said, I'm a big fan of what O'Malley does outside of the cage. He said some dumb stuff because he's complained about the UFC's management screwing him over before. But then he's also said, fighter pay isn't a bad thing. Fighters just need to do things outside of the cage. It's like, not everyone has those capabilities. Not everyone's that charismatic. Nobody wants to listen to a Jeremy Stevens podcast. When those people Luke Rockhold podcast, right? And they still deserve to get paid. But that being said, what O'Malley's doing outside the cage is smart. And it's always cool to see combat sports athletes, and the UFC has showed the personalities of these athletes, a lot, and sort of brought them to the public's attention. But I don't know, it's always cool to see combat sports athletes who have other interests and other passions and aren't afraid to pursue those, and don't just follow this sort of stigma of the combat sports person. But the last thing that I want to talk about, at least to go in depth on in relation to this card, because we're going to go in depth on I
was going to say we went really in depth on that fight. I started talking and kept going. So
right, we're going to talk about obviously Volkanovski, Holloway, and them going forward. But the last thing I do want to mention is the Sean Strickland Alex Pereira fight that's on there. For those who don't know, Alex Pereira or Pereira, I don't know. My Brazilian or my Portuguese is not great. But Pereira's 5-1, so you might wonder why they're pushing him into a title shot this fast. He has a victory in kickboxing, 2 victories over Israel Adesanya, including a victory by knockout. So even though he would maybe have a tough time right now with the better wrestlers of the middleweight division, they're trying to give him this fight with Sean Strickland to sort of jump him right into a title shot with Adesanya, because then obviously Adesanya is probably going to end up striking with him. And then we can basically see a rematch of their 2 kickboxing fights in MMA. So it's going to be huge. The build-up to that fight is going to be incredible. They're going to use the video of Adesanya getting knocked out cold by Pereira. If Pereira is able to get by Sean Strickland, which I think he does. So
I think he does too. I think that Strickland walks too much. He just walks forward, man. He just throws constant straights and he walks forward. He's fun to watch. He's crazy. The man's insane. And he's fun to watch. And he's a really, really good fighter. He's 25-3. He beat the crap out of Uriah Hall, which was a good win for him. And he's starting to kind of climb up those ranks as well. This was one of the best matchup fight-wise I think the UFC's done in a while, outside of title fights and kind of those big fights. Like, this is a fight that's not that big to people, but to UFC fans and actual fans, this fight's huge. This fight is starting to build that kind of, like, Alex Pereira coming up from the depths of, Israel reigning the UFC for so long, just like it was in kickboxing, I'm sure. Can he kind of do it again in UFC? Sets up a lot of a storyline and a lot of money that's going to go to the UFC ultimately if Alex Pereira wins this fight. Which Strickland is also a personality, and he's weird. He's a weird dude, and he's got a lot to say. So, I mean, even if he wins this fight and keeps going up the ranks too, that's not bad for the UFC.
It's whatsoever. A win-win. Yeah, it was a smart matchmaking decision, to be honest. And you know, to like they don't give a shit about testing Pereira against a wrestler because they just want him to fight Adesanya.
Yeah.
So they can throw him against a wrestler eventually, you know, if he continues to be successful or defeats Adesanya and wants to go on a title run. But like they're just trying to set up that huge money fight.
That is a big money, and it's not yet.
It will be
because people don't know who Pereira is. They don't realize his background, and like I'm sure a lot of people don't even realize that he's beaten Adesanya twice in kickboxing.
Which is why he's on this card.
Right. Yeah. Which is why he's on the card, so they can show that in the preview of his fight. They could show the or talk about it at least and give people a background on wow, this guy's actually freaking good, and he's pushing up the ranks of that middleweight division, and we're hoping that he beats Sean Strickland and continues to catapult towards this title shot. I don't think that he hangs with guys like Vettori right now.
Brunson.
Cannonier, Whitaker. I don't think he hangs with any of those guys, really. I mean, maybe Whitaker, that'd be an interesting striking fight, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably his best bet, which is weird because Whitaker's probably the best fighter out of all those guys.
It's so weird.
But Cannonier and Brunson, Brunson gets tired. I could see him beating Brunson, actually. Brunson gets pretty tired pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
And, but Cannonier is something that he would run into where he would have to grapple a really, really strong human being for a whole fight, basically, and not get hit by him also. So
and
that's a tough fight or a tough division for him to climb up. Not saying that he can't, because obviously he's really good. But UFC is different than kickboxing ultimately.
And we saw Ciryl Gane was a kickboxer with a similar record, even more wins though, who got the title fight, and Ngannou is not a wrestler, but is a boxer who's been practicing wrestling, similar to Israel Adesanya, who maybe will break out some offensive wrestling in that fight with Pereira. That'd be great to see. Ngannou was able to out-grapple Gane because you just can't learn wrestling that fast. It takes years. It took Glover Texiera years. It's that, and that's why we don't have confidence in Pereira against like a Brunson. Even though Brunson's maybe not as good as Whitaker, Adesanya. Because it just takes too long to learn wrestling, to learn what to do with your hips and, how to not just reach over the back when somebody shoots in on you. Every fighter does that and goes for its stupid guillotine. It drives me insane. Get your hands down and dig underhooks. But, yeah. So that's something that I thought I'd point out because, like you said, there's a lot of implications there with the Pereira and Adesanya.
Yeah, and it sets up that division for something new either way. With either guy winning, it sets up that division for something new. It gives you something to throw into that mosh pit of that top five also.
Yeah.
That top five probably has Izzy, Cannonier, Vettori, Whitaker. It was Costa. Now he's up. So Brunson's in there too. So I think there's kind of a mosh pit in the top five of that division as well, so they're kind of trying to catapult one of these guys up there. But the problem that you're going to run into is that if Pereira doesn't win, how do you sell him after that?
Yeah, true.
Because right now you're selling him off of Izzy's name, which is smart, but that's the truth. Like, you're selling it off the fact that he beat Izzy twice. And he's got to kind of make a name for himself by beating Strickland. But yeah, that's something that we'll definitely have to dive into, and kind of his background, I think, on that Fight Week podcast too, and just kind of talk about his background and how good he really is. Maybe show some clips. And
there's interesting training stories about him as well.
Yeah.
From I can't remember who. Maybe Glover.
Yeah, I wonder what the odds are on that fight. We have Alex Pereira minus 120 underdog, so it's about even.
Alex Pereira's the favorite.
Yep,
Strickland's
favorite.
plus 100 underdog. Yeah.
Pereira's the favorite, minus 120.
Not surprising.
Yeah,
but it's closer than I thought, honestly. And I guess I kind of thought Strickland would be the favorite, just because he's got so much experience.
Yeah,
but
that's what I thought too, and maybe it would mean more if he. I don't know. He just beat Hermanson though too.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
He's a good fighter, but
he's
got to wrestle. He's got to try and take down Pereira.
Yeah.
And we have to move on from this card because we keep going super in depth on every fight after saying we're not going to.
Right.
But our last segment
so
for
good,
today, it is such a good card. How do you not talk about it? How do you not just keep talking about these fights forever? Like, this is one of the best cards of the modern UFC era. We'll see how much it holds together. Stomp the injury bug. screw the injury bug. I hope it doesn't hurt this card, but we'll see. Yeah, especially I hope it doesn't derail Jared Cannonier because he's been at it for a while. He deserves a title shot.
Yep.
But our fourth and final segment for today, if we had a podcast blank years ago, today we're doing if we had a podcast 7 years ago, how would we have reacted to the media tour leading up to the Jose Aldo Conor McGregor fight on December 12th, where Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo in 12 seconds and took the featherweight title from the longtime featherweight king, as part the sort of cherry on top of his meteoric rise through the featherweight division, which would launch his rise through the lightweight division. But there was an interesting video that was released a while back arguing the title of the video was a bit provocative and clickbaity. It said, the UFC is rigged, I believe is the name of it. And, while neither of us believe the fights are rigged, both of us, of course, think that the two athletes, go in there and fight it out. And the UFC is not influencing the refs or judges or the fighters directly. There is 100% an argument to be made that these fights are influenced. And there are various ways that the UFC influences the fights. So if you remember, in 2015, the lead up to this fight was insane. Both fighters were forced to go on media tours, where they would do things like go to Ireland and give a bunch of drunk Irish fans, the microphone for an hour to ask questions. They just ruthlessly taunted Jose Aldo. I think it was pretty clear that Jose Aldo was psychologically affected in that fight, and it's cool how much he's learned from that and how we've seen this late career resurgence from Aldo, and I hope he gets the title fight here at bantamweight. But, to what level do you think that media tour affected him, and could you even go to the point of saying that it's rigged?
The media tour for me was Jose Aldo's fight. That was his fight. He had to make it through that media tour to beat McGregor twice, basically, to have to fight him in real life and beat him mentally against a guy who changed the game for trash talk in the UFC, and changed the idea of mental warfare in fighting for people, and kind of opened the eyes of a lot of people of like, wow, you can truly break a human being before you even lay a hand on them, just by talking. And I just pulled this up. I counted. There was 12 press conferences that they had to go to around the world. Some in Rio, Vegas, Los Angeles, Boston, Vancouver, Calgary, New York, Toronto, European Championships in Dublin, London, and then Dublin again one more time before the fight. So giving McGregor the last kind of push.
The last one was in Dublin, right? At the
Dublin.
Fan event where the fans got to taunt Aldo. And I'll let you keep going here, but how many of them were in Latin America compared to how many were in the West, in New England, in Boston, in Europe, in Dublin, and places where people, in Alberta, Canada, New York, Vancouver, places where people are rooting for McGregor. They aren't going to Brazil, Venezuela, Ecuador, and obviously the markets there aren't as big. The buzz for fighting isn't as big. But that's exactly the point. They were trying to push McGregor because he's such a huge star in these Western markets. And I think that they did this tour, and it, part of the goal of it was to, get in Aldo's head.
Yeah, and I think that, it ultimately it did. And if you look at these press conferences, the very first one in Rio was open to the public, okay? And then you just had random Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Boston. Boston was open to the public because of all the Irish people there.
Yep. Notice how they open it to the public when it's a place with a high Irish presence.
New York event is open to free and public. London was closed. All these were closed except for the ones that favored McGregor. And then the one at the top in Rio for Aldo. But even in these ones that had no fans, it was only media. That's just, March 23rd and March 24th. That's just 2 days straight of Conor McGregor abusing Jose Aldo mentally and completely getting him fired up and having his emotions just go completely crazy about a fight that's not going to happen for another, so many months, or maybe whatever it may be. But, that changes it too. That changes seeing that same guy you're gonna fight and having that same guy break you a little bit each day. And when there's no fans to root for you or cheer for you when you say something, it's kind of just you and him going back and forth. And that point, he was done. I mean, you're not beating Conor McGregor in a one-on-one battle of words. I mean, not a lot of people are going to do that in general.
Right.
So even the ones that weren't open to the public still catch my attention a little bit. That it was just them one-on-one, and there was nobody to really help Jose in those situations. They'd have weird ones on like Fox Sports or whatever, where it was like Jose's daughter was the translator for him, and it was Jose's daughter and him sitting next to each other, and then Conor on the other side, and then just the reporter in the middle. Like what kind of interview press conference is this? And it was just Conor attacking Jose in front of his daughter, and obviously his daughter is going to be distraught from these things. So it's to me it was
about that.
Yeah, like that's even more of a setup that I didn't even think about until right now. And I'm a huge Conor fan, and I was during that time. And did he have something to do with that? I'm sure he did have something to do with the fact of all these locations and kind of how they pushed it and everything, and it had something to do with kind of the whole scene behind that division and kind of his rise, and also with him fighting Mendez, because Aldo had to pull out of that first fight. So they felt like they owed McGregor something almost, even though he had beaten Mendez and won the title and still had this triumphant comeback in that fight, even because he got taken down and elbowed and kind of beat for a couple rounds. But yeah, I mean, looking back on this, man, it's something that I would have never thought about in the time of this fight happening, kind of the buildup of it, just because I was such a big McGregor fan. I'm like, this is great. We should get to watch him banter at Jose Aldo for a month, and all around the world, and have all these press conferences and kind of have everything just kind of explode in one area. But it ultimately ended up ruining the fight for Jose Aldo. He goes out and reaches for a hand that he did not need to reach for, a backhand, I believe, and gets knocked out in 12 seconds. And like you said, props to him for coming back from it. Yeah. I thought that was the end.
I did too.
I thought that was the end of his career. I'm like, this guy is done. He came back and beat Jeremy Stephens with a nasty body shot, I remember, and maybe a couple other fights before that. But this is like a new form of Jose Aldo, and he just constantly keeps evolving into these new forms of Jose Aldo. Like this guy's never gonna age. It's another Glover type of thing but he's looking like he's not even aging. He looks the same.
Yeah, he's looking better in every fight. And going into the specifics of this media tour just a little bit more, like McGregor had 2 events in Brazil. I think only one of them open to the public, and the other was like a FIFA event. So he has to prepare one-liners and things to say to the Brazilian crowd for 1 or 2 events. And we saw him go into Brazil and be like, if I was a king, in the ancient day, I would ride in on horseback. He had to write those lines down for 1 event. Jose Aldo had like 12. And like you said, it's not a fair competition to begin with, because you have McGregor, who's this master wordsmith, versus Aldo. And we'd seen sort of verbal warfare like with Chael Sonnen versus Anderson Silva, but like you were saying, nobody even realized it at the time, because McGregor kind of changed the game. This is the first time we had seen anything like this, where there's a world tour to hype a fight. So it was something that people weren't privy to at the time, I guess, or people weren't thinking about, that we can only kind of look back and look at in retrospect. So, which is interesting, because the name of this podcast is If We Had a Podcast 7 Years Ago, or the name of the segment. But we obviously can't go back in time, because now we have the power of hindsight. We're looking back after 7 years, and I gotta say, the one person who did see it and who was critical of it from the beginning was Khabib Nurmagomedov, because he's from that Dagestani culture, has a much different approach to fighting than McGregor. He's ethically, morally, and philosophically opposed to McGregor's sort of brash style, and this idea of, I'm going to say whatever I want, I'll insult your religion, your wife, whoever else, as long as it sells the fight. All that matters is the market, appealing to consumer demand, the invisible hand of the market. That's not what Khabib and a lot of Russian people believe in. He called that out from the beginning, and I agree. I think this is a capitalist sort of mutation of fighting, where crap talking and the psychological warfare is always going to be part of it. You always have to build the fight. But, this is a situation where McGregor's the biggest star the UFC's ever seen by far. He's, trying to get stock in the UFC, so he's the only fighter who's a part owner of the company. And then they're setting up, a media tour like this where his opponent gets psychologically tortured for months before the fight. It is how, for me, it's capitalism morphing, the beautiful art of mixed martial arts in the fight game. And taking it to the point where this is no longer just hyping and building a fight in a way that's fair, but this is, psychologically torturing one of the athletes in order to give an advantage to an athlete who's going to bring in more revenue for the WME IMG, the multi-billion-dollar corporation who owns the UFC, multi-trillion-dollar maybe even. So.
Yeah, God, the pressure that Jose Aldo had to have going to that fight. I mean, like, yeah, he was set up to lose. I mean, if that's another way of saying rigged, I guess, but that he was set up to lose that fight, and
he still could have won.
Ultimately, he got
ultimately
he got punched in the face and knocked out. Like, that wasn't fake. I don't know. You guys want to run it back? Go ahead, look it up. It wasn't fake. He went stiff as a board. He got rocked in the jaw.
He cut McGregor as well with his first punch.
There's not much that you can do in that situation. You get hit, right in the right spot. You're going out. You can't really help it. But I mean, even if you watch that fight back when they're standing in the cage before they start, it's just like, God, Jose's terrified. Yeah, he's just terrified. He's looking down at the ground. Conor's just embracing the crowd and the atmosphere and the pressure. You can just tell it's not on his shoulders at all. And it's just the buildup of all that stuff too. And it's happened again with Alvarez.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do I didn't do a world tour for it, but they gave Conor a lot of chances to talk to Alvarez in an interview setting one-on-one, whether it was like over video or doing like an interview where they were split screening kind of, or in the same building at the press conference in New York City when they had that big Alvarez threw the chair at him and whatnot, that whole thing. So I mean, they give McGregor those opportunities to kind of bash people, and has done it his whole career. They did it with Poirier too. The very first fight, they let Conor just absolutely tear into Poirier, and Poirier broke. Didn't happen the second and third fight.
Right, people learn from Jose too.
Yeah,
and
they know,
Alvarez.
Yeah, and they know he just talks. And you get a guy like Khabib that just don't care.
Or Diaz.
Yeah. Or Poirier as time went on, like
the more mature version of Dustin Poirier, the Dustin Poirier who learned from being through that experience one time. We've seen it make fighters better, mentally. Jose Aldo's he's incredibly mentally strong now. In this or he has been throughout this late career resurgence that we've seen since this went down. But yeah, I don't know. I think one of the solutions, I mean, there's only so many solutions you can have because the UFC at the end of the day is owned by WME IMG, multi-billion-dollar company owned by a bunch of capitalists in Las Vegas or wherever else. So they're always going to, try and appeal to the markets. But if the fighters could unionize, well, first of all, they need to stop being private contractors. That's how the UFC prevents them from unionizing and organizing. They need to unionize and eventually get to the point where there's partial worker ownership. And not worker ownership as in Conor McGregor gets to own part of the company and manipulate decisions because he's the wealthiest star. I mean, worker ownership at the lowest level so that we make sure fighters aren't having to work second jobs while they train in the UFC. Or, I don't know what the payouts are for some of the fighters lower on the cards, but it gets absurd.
Dude, like
it gets and Francis Ngannou's payouts for a title fight were absurdly low, and they say that they're paying these fighters their value. No, they're not, because the company is making billions and billions and billions of dollars in revenue, and they're doing things like suspending fighters like Nick Diaz for smoking weed. But then when all of a sudden marijuana is legal and popular, they're selling this bobblehead of Nate Diaz smoking and making trillions of revenue off that. Not trillions, but tons of revenue off that. So if they were paying the fighters the value that they create, the fighters would be getting a chunk of that insane amount of revenue that comes in. But instead, it's being funneled into shareholders who are part of WME IMG.
He won. Paddy Pimblett won $12K to show, $12K to win, and then the $50K bonus for the finish. But I saw an interview with him that he said he was making more money outside of the UFC, so that's why he's not also pushing himself so hard. He's like, I'm not pushing the fight because they're not going to pay me, and I'm making more outside of the UFC doing like interviews and sponsorships and being Patty the Batty and just being able to promote yourself better than the UFC's been able to promote you and give you money more ways than the UFC can, which is crazy because that's his profession and that's his place of work is the UFC, so they should be giving him the majority of his cut, I feel like. Or pay,
and I'm not, I'm not to be a Debbie Downer, and this is one of the hardest things to confront as an MMA fan, but I think we do need to confront it. Is like, there was an MMA fighter who was 24 years old and had like only been knocked out one time in his career, didn't have that many fights, and he got in a car accident and died, sadly. They did an autopsy on him, and he had CTE from fighting. He was only 24 and had only been knocked out once. So these fighters are getting brain damage. They are getting brain damage no matter what, level or part of the card that they're on. So to make, to get brain damage for $24,000 and, not knowing if you're going to have health insurance afterwards is crazy.
It's crazy. But these guys are crazy.
They are.
And that's what UFC preys on, is those guys that just don't care, really, and they're just like, whatever. I mean, for some of them it works out,
Yeah.
They become millionaires, or like Conor, he was on social welfare, and then hits his big break and becomes a multi-freaking millionaire, probably a billionaire, damn near.
Sure he is.
Close. And doesn't have to worry about his kids or his kids' kids or his family or anybody, and then you got guys like Paddy Pimblett who's selling the same. Not in the sense of pay-per-views and everything that McGregor did on his way up, because McGregor was huge, but the UK has Paddy Pimblett's back just as much as Ireland did McGregor, and I think that he is rising and kind of has the same persona and kind of has the same almost attentiveness to the game as McGregor does. I think there's a lot of tendencies that he has that McGregor had coming up in the ranks of the UFC too. So I think it's interesting to see how they push him differently, and how he's. I wonder what Conor was making when he fought like Marcus Brimage or something.
Right.
Like I want that would interest me to.
I mean, that would have been his first fight, but he was already a pretty big star coming out of Cage Warriors, same as Paddy.
He made 60 as a knockout, 8,000 to fight. 8,000 win bonus.
Yeah, so he didn't make that much for that.
Yeah.
Because he was not a big star.
Yeah. But
he still bought a solid gold pocket watch.
He did. And some of these guys, especially overseas, have been doing this since they could freaking walk. So back to the CTE thing, that guy has CTE at the age of 24. He's probably been fighting, boxing, getting hit in the head since he was like 9, 8. So like it probably still builds up either way. And
yeah, it made me wonder about my own wrestling career.
Right.
How the amount of times I've gotten hit in my head and just
you don't even notice
shaking it off,
yeah.
Right?
But yeah, I mean it's interesting. Kind of got off a little bit off topic there, but yeah, that was the topic for if we could go back. There's definitely going to be some interesting ones that we have to talk about. There's so many, I feel like. And I feel like when we release this too, if there's any suggestions in the comments of what you guys want us to talk about or do, definitely leave them. Like this is our first one. This is kind of just a makeshift setup that we have right now. We're going to have a studio here soon, actually, so it'll be a little bit more intact and not us sitting on a couch in our living rooms, but we got to deal with what we have right now. And, but yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about Alistair Overeem eating horse meat.
Yeah,
a career recap of Bob Sapp. Like stuff like this
Houston
is really
Alexander Kimbo Slice.
Right,
that's
we got to do
the first fight we're reviewing. Houston
breakdown
Alexander,
of that.
Kimbo Slice.
Like
they just stand there.
There's so many things to do. I mean, the circling that they showed in that fight is incredible.
Joe Rogan just keeps saying, like, the footwork by Houston Alexander. It's like, no, he's just running away from Kimbo. Kimbo standing in the center.
What a fight.
R.I.P. Kimbo.
Yeah.
But.
True. All right. Well, thank you for watching our first podcast. Hope you enjoyed. We'll be back with another one soon. We are Midwestern Martial Arts. Peace out.